She called me family, like it was a blessing, soft as Sunday morning. 2 weeks later, every door in that house locked behind me, except one. I stood there holding my purse, listening to silence decide who I was now. I'm a grandma who believes doors should stay open and words should mean something. After my son married her, I moved into their big, quiet house, thinking family was still family, until I learned how quickly kindness can get managed. The house was quiet that first morning, too quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see who I'd be. Before we begin, sweetheart, if stories like this remind you of someone you love, go on and tap like. And if you don't want to feel alone listening, subscribe. Now, let me tell you what happened. She said it with a smile. Her hand rested on my arm like it belonged there. Family, she said, soft and warm like Sunday gravy simmering slow. I believed her. I believed her because I wanted to, because I raised my son to mean what he said, because when a woman looks you in the eye and calls you family, you don't question it right away. You let it settle. You let it feel good. The house smelled new then, fresh paint, lemon cleaner, something sharp and clean, like all the old air had been pushed out. The walls were still bare in places, nails waiting for pictures that hadn't been chosen yet. Sunlight came in wide through the front windows, landing on the floor in pale rectangles. It looked like a beginning. I stood just inside the doorway with my purse still on my shoulder, keys heavy in my hand, not sure where to set them down. She took my coat before I could offer it, hung it in a hall closet that smelled like cedar and something floral. Too neat, too arranged. "You'll love it here," she said, not asking, telling. My son stood a few steps behind her. He smiled, but not with his eyes. His eyes kept drifting away, like there was something just over my shoulder he needed to check on. I told myself he was tired. Weddings do that to people. New jobs, new mortgages, new wives. Marriages are busy things. I followed her down the hall to the guest room. She called it that. Guest room, even though we'd talked about me staying a while, just until I figured out my next step, just until things settled. The room was small but clean, beige carpet, white walls, one window looking out at the side fence. "This will be yours," she said. "Make it cozy." Yours, not home, not stay as long as you like. I nodded, smiled back. That's what you do when someone opens their house to you. You don't nitpick the words. I unpacked slow, always have. I believe rushing makes you forget things. I folded my blouses carefully, smoothing the fabric like it might remember me, slid them into drawers that smelled like store-bought wood polish, not like the old dresser I had back home, the one my husband fixed when the leg wobbled. I set my shoes in a neat line, put my nightgown under the pillow like I always do the first night somewhere new. Old habit, makes sleeping easier. As I worked, I listened. The house made sounds I didn't know yet, pipes clicking, a faint hum from somewhere behind the walls, footsteps that paused when I paused, voices drifting from the kitchen, low and quick, stopping when I stepped closer. She passed by the doorway once, glanced in, smiled again. Same smile, polite, measured, like she'd practiced it in a mirror. "You need anything?" she asked. "No, honey," I said. "I'm all right." And I was. Mostly, just tired in that deep way you get when life changes shape without asking you first. That afternoon, we sat at the kitchen table drinking iced tea. The glasses sweated onto the placemats, leaving little wet rings. She wiped them up right away, didn't like the mess sitting there too long. She talked about paint colors, about a neighbor who borrowed sugar too often, about how she likes things organized, labeled, efficient. My son nodded along, took sips, checked his phone. Every now and then his eyes flicked toward me, then away again, like he meant to say something but couldn't find the space. I asked him how work was going. "Busy," he said. Just that. I waited, but nothing else came. She jumped in, filling the quiet. "He's doing great. They really value him." They. Always they. When she talked, she leaned slightly forward, elbows close to her sides. Everything about her was contained, controlled. Even her laugh came out careful, like she didn't want it spilling too far. She reached across the table and touched my hand, just briefly. "I'm so glad you're here," she said. "Family means everything to us." Her fingers were cool, her nails perfect. I felt something small shift in my chest, like a picture frame tilting on the wall. I smiled back. Of course I did. That night, I lay in the guest bed listening to the house settle. The sheets were crisp. Too crisp. They crackled when I moved. I stared at the ceiling, counting a small crack that ran from the corner toward the light fixture. 1, 2, 3. I lost track somewhere around 20. Down the hall, I heard their door close. Soft, deliberate. I thought about my old place, the way the floor creaked outside my bedroom, how the refrigerator hummed too loud, how silence there felt earned, not arranged. Here, silence felt managed. The next morning, I woke early, habit again. Sun barely up, light gray and thin through the window. I padded down the hall in my slippers, careful not to wake anyone. The kitchen was spotless, no sign of last night's dinner except the faint smell of soap. I started the kettle, watched it, listened. She came in a few minutes later, already dressed, hair smooth, moving like she had a schedule inside her bones. "Morning," she said, cheerful. "I didn't hear you." "I try to be quiet," I said. She smiled, that same one. "You don't have to tiptoe. This is your home now, too." Home. There it was again. A different word this time, softer, more generous. I nodded, even though something in me didn't settle right. My son came in last. He kissed her cheek, grabbed a mug, poured coffee without looking. He stood close to her, shoulders angled away from me. Not rude, just aligned. We ate toast together, butter melting into the bread, crumbs on the plate. She wiped those up right away. Later, as I carried my empty plate to the sink, I noticed a small sign taped inside a cabinet door. A list, cleaning days, grocery brands, notes written in neat handwriting. Rules, without calling them rules. I didn't say anything. I never do at first. I believe giving things time to explain themselves. But as the days went on, I noticed the way she watched. Not staring, just noting. Where I put my purse, how long I stayed in the living room, when I stepped outside to sit on the porch. Once, I moved a framed photo slightly to straighten it. She moved it back later, just an inch, just enough. "You don't have to fuss," she said lightly. "I like knowing where things are." I apologized, even though I wasn't sure for what. My son didn't notice, or maybe he did and chose not to. He stayed busy, work calls, errands, projects around the house that didn't include me. At dinner one night, she reached for my hand again. "We're really glad you're here," she said. "Family means everything to us." Her voice was warm, practiced, perfect. I looked at my son, finally held his gaze. He smiled, quick, then looked down at his plate. I felt something then. Not pain, not yet, just a small, steady unease, like when you set a glass too close to the edge of the table and spend the whole meal watching it, waiting for the moment it might fall. I went back to my room early that night, sat on the bed, ran my fingers over the quilt I brought from home, the one with uneven stitches and faded colors. I folded it carefully at the foot of the bed, smoothing it down like a promise. In the quiet, I heard her laughter drift from the living room, soft, controlled, ending exactly when she wanted to. I lay back and stared at the ceiling again. The crack looked longer tonight. She called me family, and I wanted to believe her, but somewhere deep down, a door I didn't know existed had already begun to close. The first door I noticed was the back one. It didn't open when it should have. I stood there with my hand on the knob, morning light spilling through the small window above the sink. The kettle was still warming. The house smelled like coffee and something sweet she'd baked early. I turned the knob once, then again. Nothing. Just that tight, stubborn feeling of metal refusing you. I laughed softly to myself at first, thought maybe I hadn't turned it right. Old hands, early morning. Then I saw the lock. It hadn't been there before, at least not one that mattered. I didn't say anything. I poured my coffee, added milk, stirred slow. The spoon clinked against the mug, loud in the quiet kitchen. She came in a minute later, already dressed, keys in her hand. "Oh," she said, noticing where I stood. "We lock that one now." "We," she added quickly, "just for safety. You know how things are these days." I nodded, because that's what you do when someone explains things gently. You don't question safety. You don't argue with concern, especially not in someone else's house. Still, when she left the room, I tried the knob again, just to be sure. Locked. The pantry came next. I reached for it later that afternoon, hands full of groceries. Soup cans clinked together in the bag. The door wouldn't budge. I shifted my grip, tried again. Still nothing. She appeared behind me without a sound. That always surprised me, how quiet she could be. "Oh, I reorganized," she said. "I'll handle the food storage now. It's just easier that way." Easier for who, I wondered. She took the bag from my hands before I could answer, set it down, opened the pantry with a key I hadn't seen before, moved quick, efficient, like she didn't want me watching too closely. I stepped back, smiled, thanked her. That night, I checked my keys. I'd always kept them the same way: house key, back door, old shed from my place before, a small brass one I couldn't remember the purpose of anymore but carried out of habit. They'd been heavy once, comforting. The sound they made meant I belonged somewhere. Now they sounded thinner. I told myself I must have misplaced one, set it down somewhere odd. That happens when you change environments, when your hands don't know where things live yet. The next morning, the hallway bathroom was locked. I noticed when my bladder woke me up before the sun. I shuffled down the hall, half asleep, and stopped short. Door closed, handle stiff. I stood there longer than I needed to, long enough to feel foolish. I went back to my room and used the small bathroom connected to it, the guest bathroom, the one she'd pointed out with a smile when I first arrived. "This one's all yours," she'd said. All yours. Just this much. At breakfast, I mentioned it casually, like it didn't matter. "Oh yes," she said, spreading jam carefully. "We keep that locked at night. Just a habit." "A habit from where?" I asked before I could stop myself. She smiled again, that same smile. "From before. It helps with routines." Routines. My son kept eating, didn't look up, didn't notice the way my fingers tightened around my fork. After that, things disappeared, slowly, quietly, like the house itself was changing its mind about me. A cabinet I used for my cereal stayed locked. The laundry room door clicked shut one afternoon when I stepped out to grab soap. I stood there staring at it, soap still in my hand, wondering how I'd managed to lock myself out of a room I hadn't touched. She heard me eventually, came down the hall, keys jingling, opened it with a practiced twist. "You've got to remember to close doors properly," she said lightly. I apologized. Again. My key ring kept losing weight. One afternoon, I noticed the back door key gone completely, just missing. I searched my purse, the small dish by my bed, the pocket of my coat. Nothing. When I asked her, she didn't hesitate. "Oh, I took that," she said. "We don't really need extra copies floating around." Floating around. Like I was careless. Like I might misplace the house itself. She handed me a cup of tea after, like that made things even. I accepted it, because I didn't want trouble, because I didn't want to be the old woman making a fuss over keys, because somewhere along the way I'd learned that peace sometimes means swallowing questions whole. But peace shouldn't feel this empty. The house felt different once the doors started choosing who to answer to. Sound changed, footsteps echoed longer, silence settled heavier. I became aware of where I was allowed to go and when. I started planning my movements, waiting until she left the room before heading to the kitchen, using the bathroom early so I wouldn't have to ask later, sitting longer in my room, door open, like openness might invite permission. My son noticed, I think. Once he paused in the hallway and looked at me. "You okay, Mom?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said, because that's what mothers say when they don't want to cause a crack in the wall. He nodded and walked away. That evening, I sat on the edge of my bed and turned my remaining keys over in my palm. They felt foreign now, lighter, quieter. When I shook them, the sound barely traveled. I thought about all the doors I'd unlocked in my life: front doors at dawn, hospital doors late at night, the door to my son's childhood bedroom when he was sick and calling for me. Doors that opened because they trusted my hand. Here, the doors didn't know me. She passed by my room and stopped. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "just settling in." She leaned against the frame, arms crossed loosely. "It's important we keep things orderly. That helps everyone feel safe." Safe. I nodded, again. She left, footsteps soft, controlled. The hallway light clicked off a moment later. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The crack looked darker tonight, more certain. Safety, I realized, isn't just locks and keys. It's knowing you can reach the sink when you're thirsty, knowing you can open a door without asking, knowing your presence doesn't need explaining. This safety felt narrow, measured, conditional. I closed my eyes and listened to the house breathe around me, doors clicking, locks settling into place, the faint sound of keys moving somewhere I wasn't. I held my own keys tighter, even though there weren't many left, and for the first time since moving in, I wondered how many doors would still open for me tomorrow.
The only door that still opened for me was the one at the end of the hall, the smallest one, the quietest one. It made a soft sound when I pushed it open, like it didn't want to be noticed. The carpet inside was older than the rest of the house, flattened in places, worn thin near the bed. It smelled faintly of dust and something sweet. Maybe the last candle burned in there before I arrived. One window faced the side fence, white boards, no view, just a slice of sky if you leaned the right way. This was my space now, the one door that still answered to my hand. I told myself it was enough. During the day, I kept the door open. It felt important, like proof I wasn't hiding, like if I closed it, it might turn into another lock I didn't own. Sunlight came in shallow through the window, barely touching the floor. I'd sit on the bed and fold things that didn't need folding, straighten edges, smooth wrinkles that weren't there. The house moved around me without stopping. I could hear it breathe, cabinets opening and closing, the low hum of the dishwasher, her footsteps, light, efficient, never wasted, my son's heavier steps, always moving somewhere else. Sometimes I stood in the hallway and watched, waiting, not for anything specific, just waiting. It felt like a favor, being allowed this room, and favors come with rules, even when they're unspoken. I learned the rules fast. Don't leave your things in common spaces. Don't linger in the kitchen. Don't ask what's for dinner. Wait to be told. Don't sit in the living room when company comes. I followed them without writing them down. They settled into me naturally, the way you learn to be quiet in church or careful in someone else's grief. At night, the house changed. Dinner ended earlier than it used to. Plates clinked together, silverware tapped against porcelain. I could hear her laughter drift down the hall, controlled, neat, ending when she chose. My son laughed too, but it sounded different now, lower, shorter, like he didn't want it traveling too far. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. The thin walls didn't keep much out. I heard the TV murmuring, the murmur of their voices blending together. Sometimes my name floated through, followed by a pause. I never heard what came after. I pressed my feet into the carpet. It didn't give much. The floor beneath felt solid, unmoved by any of us. I thought about all the rooms I'd lived in over the years, kitchens full of noise, bedrooms crowded with laundry and life, spaces that bent themselves around the people inside them. This room didn't bend. It waited. One evening, I heard the front door open and close. A different voice joined theirs. Company. Plates clinked louder. Chairs scraped. I stayed where I was. Door open, hands folded in my lap. No one came to get me. I told myself it was a mistake, that they assumed I was tired, that I preferred quiet. Old people do, after all. But when the laughter rose, full and warm, I felt something small pull tight in my chest. Not jealousy, just distance. After a while, I got up and closed my door, slowly, carefully, as if I didn't want the house to hear. The click of the latch felt final. Inside the room, everything felt closer. The walls, the ceiling, my own breathing. I sat back down and stared at the quilt folded at the foot of the bed, the one from home. The uneven stitches caught the light. I ran my fingers along them, counting years without trying. This room didn't know my history. It didn't care. Later, when the house quieted again, I heard my son pass by. His steps slowed near my door, stopped. I waited, held my breath like a child pretending to be asleep. He didn't knock. His steps moved on. The hallway light clicked off. I lay down and stared at the ceiling. The crack ran farther here, like it had followed me from the first room. I wondered if cracks do that, show up wherever you sleep long enough. In the morning, I woke early again. The house was still. I sat up and listened. Nothing, just the faint tick of the clock in the hall. I opened my door and stepped out. The hallway felt longer than before. Doors on either side stayed closed, silent, private. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, cleaned the mug before anyone else woke, and put it back exactly where it belonged. When she came in, she smiled. "Good morning," she said. "Did you sleep all right?" "Yes," I said, because sleep isn't just rest, it's permission. She glanced down the hall toward my room. "You're welcome to keep your door closed at night, you know. Privacy is important." Privacy. I nodded. That afternoon, I tried sitting in the living room. The couch was firm, decorative pillows lined up like they didn't want to be touched. I sat on the edge, hands folded, eyes on the window. She passed through, paused. "Oh, I'm about to vacuum in here. You might be more comfortable in your room." Of course, I thought. Of course. I went back down the hall, back to the one door. It opened easily, as if it had been waiting for me. That night, I didn't turn on the lamp. I sat in the dark listening again. Plates, voices. My son's voice softer than it used to be when he lived with me. Back then, he filled rooms without trying. Now his words stayed close to her. I wondered when that changed, or if it always had and I just hadn't noticed. I pressed my ear lightly to the wall, not to eavesdrop, just to feel less alone. The vibration of life on the other side reminded me I was still here, still breathing, still part of something, even if it didn't know it. Being kept, I realized, doesn't always look like bars. Sometimes it looks like a clean room at the end of a hall, a door that opens, and nowhere else to go. I lay down and pulled the quilt up around my shoulders. The fabric was familiar, heavy in the right places. I closed my eyes and pictured my old living room, the way sunlight hit the floor there, the sound of my husband's chair scraping back when he stood. That house had held me. This one just housed me. As sleep came slow and thin, I wondered how long a person could live inside one open door before forgetting how many they used to have.
The rules didn't arrive all at once. They came like dust, settling where no one thought to look. At first, I couldn't have named them if you asked. There was no list taped inside a cabinet this time, no gentle explanation over coffee, just a feeling, a tightening, like the house had learned a new posture and expected me to follow. I noticed it when I moved a chair, just a few inches, closer to the window so the light could reach me better in the afternoon. I liked reading there, always had. The sun made the words easier on my eyes. When I came back from the bathroom, the chair was where it had been before. Not pushed back roughly, not slammed, just returned, corrected. She stood nearby, wiping the counter. Her movements were small and efficient. She didn't look at me. "I keep things a certain way," she said lightly, as if she were talking to the room. "Helps the space feel calm." I nodded, smiled, moved on. Care looks a lot like calm if you don't look too close. After that, I stopped touching things. I didn't straighten picture frames anymore, didn't move the throw blanket when it slid off the couch, didn't open drawers I hadn't been shown. I learned where my hands were welcome and where they weren't. Silence taught me. I thought about inviting my friend Ruth over one afternoon. We've known each other 40 years. She's loud in a comforting way, brings lemon cake wherever she goes. I mentioned it once over lunch like it was nothing. "Oh," she said, pausing just a beat too long. "This week's not great. We've got a lot going on." A lot going on meant nothing I could see. I waited, didn't push. Weeks passed. I didn't bring it up again. Dinner became its own lesson. At first, we ate together. Early evenings, plates warm, conversation careful but present. I asked about their day. They answered politely. She steered the talk. He followed. Then one night she said, "We're running a little late tonight. Go ahead and eat if you're hungry." I wasn't, really, but I nodded. The next night, the same. After that, I started eating earlier on purpose, 5 o'clock, sometimes earlier. I didn't want to be in the way, didn't want to ask if they were ready, didn't want to hover. I microwaved leftovers, sat alone at the small kitchen table. The food cooled fast without conversation to hold it warm. I chewed slower, like stretching it out might make it last. Through the wall, I heard their plates later, their voices, the clink of forks, laughter sometimes. Not loud, just enough to remind me of the timing. I washed my dish right away, dried it, put it back where it belonged. She watched me. Not openly, not staring, but the way a person checks the time without looking at their watch, quick glances, quiet notes taken somewhere behind the eyes. If I stayed in the kitchen too long, she appeared. If I lingered in the living room, she found something to straighten near me. If I spoke at dinner, she responded politely, then redirected the conversation away. It was never rude. That was the hardest part. My son stayed quiet through all of it. He sat where he was told, ate when food was placed in front of him, let her answer questions meant for him, let her speak for both of them. Once I asked him directly if he wanted me to help with groceries. He looked at her first. She smiled. "We've got it covered." He nodded. "Yeah, Mom, we're good." I felt something small go still inside me. At night, I replayed the days like scenes from a movie with the sound turned down. I looked for the moment where care crossed into something else, tried to pinpoint it. Was it when she decided how the house should feel? When she decided how I should move through it? Or when I started deciding those things for myself before she had to? One evening, I brought my plate to the sink a little later than usual. I'd lost track of time reading. The kitchen light was dim. The clock ticked louder than it should have. She came in behind me. "We usually clean up right away," she said softly. "It keeps things from piling up." "I'll remember," I said. She nodded, watched me rinse the plate, waited until I set it in the rack just right. Then she smiled. "You're adjusting so well." Adjusting. I went back to my room and closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, pressed my hands into the mattress. It didn't give much. I thought about my old kitchen, how dishes sometimes sat overnight, how no one minded, how mess didn't mean disrespect, just living. Here, living had rules. One afternoon, I tried to ask a question at dinner. Nothing big, just asked where they were planning to go for Thanksgiving. She answered quickly, "We haven't decided yet." My son took a sip of water, didn't add anything. I waited, then asked, "Will you be traveling far?" She smiled again, that same smile. "We'll see." Conversation moved on. I stayed quiet the rest of the meal. Questions, I learned, weren't encouraged. They slowed things down, introduced possibilities, required answers. Silence was easier. Later that week, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked smaller somehow, shoulders slightly rounded, hands folded even when I was alone. I didn't recognize that posture right away. It reminded me of waiting rooms, offices, places where you wait to be called. That night, my son passed by my door. I opened it. "Can I ask you something?" I said. He stopped, hesitated. "Sure, Mom." I wanted to ask him when he stopped seeing me, when I became something to manage, something to schedule around. Instead, I asked, "Are you happy?" He smiled, automatic. "Yeah, of course." I searched his face for something else, found only tiredness. "That's good," I said. He nodded, looked down the hall. "I should get back." He didn't ask if I needed anything. After he left, I sat back down. The quiet felt thicker now, like it had weight. I realized then that the rules weren't really about furniture or meals or questions. They were about keeping things smooth, predictable, controlled. Care becomes control when comfort matters more than people. I wondered when my presence stopped being something to accommodate and started being something to manage. I wondered why my son never interrupted, never said, "Mom, it's fine," never said, "She didn't mean it that way," never said anything at all. Maybe silence had rules for him too. That night I ate early again. The food cooled. I didn't mind. I was used to it now. I washed my plate, dried it, put it away. She watched from the doorway, checked the time on her phone, smiled. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said, because that's what quiet rules teach you to say. I went back to my room, closed the door, sat on the bed in the dim light. The house moved on without me. Plates later, voices later, life continuing on schedule. I lay back and stared at the ceiling crack. It looked wider tonight, or maybe I was. I thought about care, about control, about how one can dress up as the other if you're not paying attention. And I wondered how long a person could live by quiet rules before forgetting how to speak out loud.
The house was quiet that afternoon. Not resting quiet, working quiet. I was folding sweaters on the bed, the window open just enough to let in a thin line of air. The fence outside held the sunlight in narrow strips. Dust moved through it slowly, like it had nowhere urgent to be. I folded the blue one first, the soft one I only wore on cool mornings. Then the gray. I lined them up the way I always had, edges even, sleeves tucked in like they'd learned manners. That's when I heard my name. Not loud, not meant for me. It drifted down the hallway the way smells do when someone else is cooking. Familiar, uninvited. I stopped folding, let the sweater rest in my hands. Her voice came next, lower than usual, careful, the kind of voice people use when they're being precise. "Yes," she said, "her name is on it." A pause. I heard the faint sound of a pen tapping. Numbers followed, not clear enough to catch, but clear enough to know they mattered. Then the word paperwork. It landed heavier than it should have. I didn't move, didn't breathe much. I sat on the edge of the bed with the sweater in my lap, listening to the spaces between her words, to the way she spoke like she was explaining something obvious to someone who already agreed. My name came up again, softer this time, almost an inconvenience. "She won't be a problem," she said. "We're simplifying." Simplifying. The call ended. I heard footsteps, a drawer opening, papers shuffling. I waited until the house settled back into its rhythm before I stood up, folded the sweater again, slower now. My hands felt thicker, like they were wrapped in something invisible. I told myself it could be anything: insurance, medical forms, taxes, old things that follow you even when you think they're done. But numbers and paperwork don't usually hide. That evening, I went into the living room. I hadn't planned to. I didn't go there much anymore. But something pulled me, a feeling I couldn't name yet. The mantel was clean, too clean. I stood there a moment, scanning it like you do when something feels off, but you can't see what. The clock ticked. The lamp hummed. Then I saw the empty space, right where the photo used to be. It was an old frame, wood chipped at the corners, the glass scratched from years of dusting. The picture inside was faded, the colors soft around the edges. My husband stood in that photo with a crooked smile, the kind he only wore when he didn't know he was being photographed. His hair was still dark then. His arm was around my shoulders, pulling me in like he always did when he wanted to make a point without saying anything. That photo had lived on mantels and shelves for decades, through moves, through downsizing, through grief. Now it was gone. I looked around, half expecting it to appear somewhere else, maybe moved, maybe cleaned. It wasn't. She came in behind me carrying a basket of folded laundry, stopped when she saw me standing there. "Oh," she said, "I meant to tell you." I turned slowly. "Where's the picture?" She glanced at the mantel, then back at me, no hesitation. "We're simplifying," she said. The words sounded practiced now, comfortable. "I didn't know it was in the way," I said. "It wasn't. We're just streamlining the space. Less clutter helps things feel lighter." Clutter. I nodded, because nodding became a reflex, because arguing over a photo felt small, even though it wasn't. "Where is it now?" I asked. She smiled, not unkind, not warm either. "Packed away, safe." Where? I wanted to ask, but I didn't. That night I lay awake longer than usual. The house made its regular sounds, pipes, distant traffic, their bedroom door closing. I stared at the ceiling and tried to picture the photo in a box somewhere, wrapped in tissue, forgotten, or worse, decided upon. I thought about the phone call, about numbers, about paperwork, about how often my name came up without me in the room. The next morning I checked my purse, not because I expected anything to be missing, just checking. Everything was there: wallet, tissues, keys that barely made a sound anymore. At breakfast she talked about donating items, about how freeing it feels to let things go, about how older generations tend to hold on to memories through objects. I buttered my toast slowly, let the knife scrape the plate. "Some memories need a place to sit," I said, not looking up. She smiled. "Memories live inside us, not on shelves." My son nodded, took a bite, chewed. I watched him swallow. Later that afternoon, I went into the living room again, sat on the edge of the couch, looked at the mantel. The empty space felt louder now. I tried to remember the last time someone asked before moving something that mattered. I couldn't. That evening, when she stepped outside to take a call, I went to the hall closet, opened it quietly. Boxes were stacked inside, labeled in neat handwriting: holiday, extra linens, donate. I didn't touch anything, just stood there, letting the smell of cardboard and dust settle around me. I wondered if my husband's photo was in one of those boxes, or if it had been categorized differently. I closed the door and went back to my room. I folded my sweaters again, unfolded them, folded them once more. My hands needed something to do. I thought about simplifying. What gets kept? What gets packed away? What gets decided without asking? That night at dinner, I asked a question I hadn't planned to ask. "What paperwork were you talking about yesterday?" The fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh," she said lightly, "just some house things." My son looked at his plate. "House things?" I repeated. "Yes, very boring," she said with a laugh that ended quickly. "You wouldn't want to hear about it." I nodded, took a sip of water. It tasted flat. After dinner, I washed my plate and dried it carefully, put it away. She watched, like always. As I passed the mantel on my way back down the hall, I stopped, just for a second, looked back at the empty space. It struck me then that simplifying didn't mean making room. It meant deciding what no longer belonged. I closed my bedroom door and sat on the bed. The quilt waited where I left it, familiar, heavy, honest. I pressed my palm against it and felt the raised stitches, the places where my hand had slipped when I was tired, the places where time showed. No one had ever tried to simplify that. I lay back and stared at the ceiling. The crack seemed to reach farther now, or maybe my eyes were better at finding it. In the quiet, I thought about my name traveling down hallways without me, about numbers attached to it, about paperwork that decided things while I folded sweaters. I wondered how much of my life could be simplified without me knowing. And I wondered how long it would take before something else went missing, something that couldn't be packed away and labeled safe.
The kettle had already boiled by the time I realized the door wasn't going to open. I was holding my teacup with both hands, the porcelain warm against my palms. Steam curled up slow, fogging my glasses just enough to blur the morning. The house was quiet in that early way, not asleep, just not ready to talk yet. I turned the knob. Nothing. I tried again, gentler this time, like the door might be startled, like it might open if I didn't embarrass it. The steam kept rising, thinning, fading. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at my own reflection in the glass of the door. My face looked pale, smaller, like it didn't belong to the woman who raised a child in a house full of noise. The lock clicked softly when I tested it again, final, certain. Behind the door, I could see the kitchen, the table, the counter, the bowl of fruit she kept arranged just so. Everything where it always was, just out of reach. I didn't knock, didn't call out. I waited. The steam from my tea disappeared completely, leaving the cup cool in my hands. I hadn't taken a single sip. Footsteps came down the hall behind me, light, measured. She stopped when she saw me standing there. "Oh," she said, like she'd just noticed the weather. "That door stays locked now." I turned slowly. "I was just getting some tea." She nodded, not apologetic, not surprised. "You can use the kitchenette in your room." The kitchenette.
a word that felt smaller than it should have. "I've always made my tea here." My voice sounded calm, even to me. She smiled, that familiar, careful smile. "We're setting some boundaries. It helps everyone feel comfortable." Boundaries. I looked down at my cup, at the faint ring left by where the steam had been. "Even with family?" I asked. "Yes," she said easily, "especially with family." My son stood a few steps behind her. He hadn't said a word. His eyes were fixed on the floor, like it might give him instructions if he stared long enough. I waited for him to look up, to say my name, to say anything. He didn't. I nodded, because nodding had become muscle memory, because my body knew what was expected before my heart caught up. "All right," I said. I walked back down the hall slowly, teacup still in my hands. I didn't spill a drop. My hands were steady like they always are when something inside me isn't. Inside my room, I set the cup on the small table by the window, sat on the edge of the bed, stared at it. The tea had gone lukewarm, bitter. I drank it anyway. The room felt smaller than it had yesterday, or maybe I was just more aware of the walls, the thinness of them, how easily sound traveled one way and not the other. I listened. I heard the kitchen door open, the clatter of plates, the sound of water running, breakfast beginning without me. I thought about all the mornings I'd spent in kitchens, teaching my son how to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl, standing half asleep at the counter while my husband read the paper aloud, making coffee for neighbors who stopped by unannounced. Kitchens were where life happened, where people crossed paths without planning it. Now mine was behind a lock. Later that morning, I tried to read, but the words wouldn't stay put. My eyes moved over the page without taking anything in. I kept seeing the door instead, the way it hadn't budged, the way she'd said boundaries like it was a kindness. Around noon, my son knocked on my door. A soft knock, careful. "Hey, Mom," he said when I opened it. "You doing okay?" I looked at him, really looked. He had circles under his eyes, lines I didn't remember putting there. "I'm fine," I said. He nodded, shifted his weight. "Good, that's good." Silence sat between us, heavy, waiting. I wanted to ask him when he stopped seeing me as someone who belonged in his life and started seeing me as something to manage. Wanted to ask him why he let doors close without reaching for the handle. Instead, I said, "Your tea's getting cold." He smiled, small, sad. I should get back. He didn't step inside. After he left, I closed the door and leaned against it, just for a second, let my forehead rest there. The wood was cool. I remembered a time when my son couldn't sleep unless the kitchen light was on, when he'd pad down the hall and stand in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, asking if I was still awake. I was, always. That afternoon, I heated soup in the microwave in my room. The hum filled the space, louder than it should have been. I ate slowly, spoon scraping the bowl, alone. Through the wall, I heard her moving around, organizing, straightening, life continuing according to plan. I wondered when I stopped being part of the plan. Later that evening, I passed the locked kitchen door again on my way to the bathroom. I didn't touch it this time, just glanced at it as I walked by, like acknowledging something you're not supposed to want. She was in the living room with my son, talking quietly. I caught fragments as I passed. For the best. Structure. Can't have confusion. Confusion. I went back to my room and closed the door. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. The house settled around me. Locks clicked. Lights turned off. The sound of the television faded. I thought about welcome, about how it isn't something you announce, it's something people feel, something that shows up in open doors and shared spaces and unspoken permission. I wondered when mine expired. The next morning, I woke early again. Habit. I sat up in bed and listened. Nothing. Just the tick of the clock. I stayed in my room. I made my tea there, using the small kettle I'd brought from home and never untacked properly. The cord barely reached the outlet. The cup felt wrong in my hands without the familiar counter beneath it. I sipped slowly, watching the steam rise and disappear. Later, she knocked on my door. "Yes," I said. She opened it just enough to look in. "We'll be out most of the day. Feel free to relax." Relax? She smiled and left before I could answer. I sat there a long time after, holding the cup, watching the light shift across the floor, listening to the house empty out. When the front door closed, the silence felt different, not watched, just hollow. I stood and walked down the hall, stopped in front of the kitchen door, stared at it. I didn't touch the knob this time, just glanced at it as I walked by, like acknowledging something you're not supposed to want. I went back to my room and sat on the bed. The quilt waited where I'd folded it, steady, familiar. I ran my hand over it and thought about welcome again, about how it fades quietly if you don't tend to it, about how boundaries can look a lot like walls if you're standing on the wrong side. That night, when my son came home, I heard his footsteps pause outside my door again, longer this time. I waited. He knocked once, soft. "Mom?" he said. "Yes." He didn't come in, didn't open the door. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, not looking at me. I could tell by his voice. "For what?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. When he did, it wasn't an answer. "We're just trying to make things work." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. After he left, I lay back and stared at the ceiling. The crack had spread, or maybe I was just better at seeing it now. I thought about kitchens, about doors, about the moment you realize you're no longer welcome in places you once belonged. And I wondered when being a mother stopped meaning you always had a seat at the table.
The light outside had turned that soft blue it gets just before night decides what it's going to be. Not dark yet, just quiet. The house felt empty in that moment, not because no one was home, but because everything had settled into place. The kind of stillness that comes after decisions have already been made. I waited until I heard her bedroom door close, until the television volume lowered, until the floor stopped creaking with movement that wasn't mine. I sat at the small table in my room, hands folded around nothing. The air smelled like dust and fabric softener, familiar but thinner than it used to be. When my son walked past my door, I called his name. "Can you sit with me a minute?" He stopped, hesitated, then stepped inside. He didn't sit right away, stood near the door like he might need to leave quickly, like this was a temporary stop. I waited for him to settle, but he didn't, so I started. "I don't feel angry," I said. "I feel erased." The word landed between us and stayed there. He looked up, startled, like he hadn't expected that one. "I feel managed," I continued, "like something that needs to be handled carefully, folded away so I don't take up too much space." My voice stayed steady. That surprised me. I'd imagined this moment before, imagined my throat closing, my words breaking apart. They didn't. My hands did, though. They shook lightly in my lap, betraying everything my voice refused to show. "I don't recognize my place here anymore," I said, "and I don't know when that happened." He finally sat down, on the edge of the bed, too far away. "I didn't know you felt that way," he said quietly. I nodded. "That's part of it." He looked down at his hands, turned his wedding ring around his finger, once, twice. "I just thought—" He stopped, swallowed. "I thought keeping things structured would help." "Help who?" I asked. He didn't answer right away.
I let the silence stretch. It deserved space. I'm not asking to run your house. I'm not asking to be in the middle of things. I just want to feel present, like I still matter. He finally looked at me then, really looked. His eyes were tired, heavy in a way I hadn't seen before, like he'd been carrying something too long and didn't know how to set it down. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. The words came out soft, careful, like they might break if he pushed them too hard. "I should have paid more attention," he added. "I should have said something." I nodded. The nod came easily. I'd rehearsed that part. "I didn't raise you to be silent," I said gently. "I raised you to be kind." He flinched, just a little. "I know," he said. "I know." We sat there, the two of us, listening to the house breathe. A pipe clicked somewhere. The hum of the refrigerator carried faintly through the walls. "I didn't want to cause tension," he said finally. "I thought if I stayed out of it, things would settle." "Silence doesn't settle things," I said. "It just lets them sink." He nodded again, slower this time. "I see that now." I watched his shoulders sag, like something heavy had finally been acknowledged. Regret sat on him plainly, no disguise, no defense. It would have been easier if he'd been angry, easier if he'd argued, easier if he'd denied everything, but regret is harder to move around. "I don't want to leave," I said. The words surprised me as they came out, "but I can't keep shrinking either." He closed his eyes for a moment, took a breath. "I'll talk to her," he said. I waited. "When?" I asked. "Soon," he replied. Soon is a soft word, comfortable, non-committal. I nodded anyway. He reached out then, hesitated, and placed his hand on mine. His palm was warm, familiar, the same hand I used to hold crossing streets, the same one I bandaged when he scraped it learning to ride a bike. "I don't want you to feel like you don't belong," he said. I looked at his hand on mine. Belonging isn't something you promise, it's something you prove. "I believe you," I said, and I did, mostly, but belief and change don't always walk together. He stood after a moment, smoothed the front of his shirt, looked toward the hallway. "She's waiting," he said. I nodded. Before he left, he paused at the door. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "Thank you for listening," I replied. The door closed softly behind him. I sat there alone again. My hands stopped shaking slowly, like they were letting go of something they'd held too tight for too long. I leaned back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The crack was still there, still spreading quietly. I thought about what I'd said, about how once spoken, words don't go back where they came from. They change the shape of things, even if nothing else moves right away. Outside, the light faded from blue to gray. Night arrived without asking. I heard voices down the hall, low, controlled. I couldn't hear the words, just the tone. Hers steady, his uncertain. I didn't press my ear to the wall this time. Some things you need to hear directly, or not at all. I lay down and pulled the quilt up around my shoulders. It smelled like home, like hands that had stitched patiently, unevenly, honestly. I thought about doors, about locks, about what it takes to open something once it's been closed carefully, deliberately. Regret is heavy, but it doesn't turn keys. That night, my son knocked on my door again. "Mom?" he said softly. "Yes?" "Can I come in?" "Yes." He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. "She needs time," he said. Time, another soft word. "I understand," I replied. He looked at me, searching. "Do you?" He nodded. "I do.
I just don't know how much more I have left to give." He swallowed. We stood there, neither of us moving, the air between us filled with everything we didn't say. "I'll figure something out," he said finally. I reached out and squeezed his arm. "I know you will." He left again, quietly. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling. The crack looked unchanged, or maybe it had grown. It's hard to tell with slow things. I'd spoken once. I didn't know yet what it would cost, or what it might open, but for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't belong entirely to them. It belonged to me, too.
Morning came in pale and quiet, like it didn't want to interrupt anything important. I woke before the alarm I didn't set. The light through the window was thin, careful, stretching just enough to remind me where I was. The house hadn't started moving yet. No footsteps, no doors, just the low hum of something electrical, steady and indifferent. I sat up slowly and let the room come back to me. The small bed, the thin walls, the one window facing the fence. This was the day my body already knew about before my mind caught up. I packed slow. I always have. Rushing makes you careless, and I didn't want to leave pieces of myself behind without choosing to. I folded my sweaters one by one, the blue, the gray. I stacked them neatly, the way I always do, even though no one was watching now. Some things went back into my bag without hesitation. My quilt, my toiletries, the old book with the cracked spine I'd been rereading since before I moved in. Other things I held longer. A mug she'd given me early on, back when we still ate breakfast together. I turned it in my hands, felt its weight, then set it back on the shelf. It wasn't mine. It never really had been. I left the room the way it had been when I arrived. Too clean, too careful, like proof I'd been there without evidence I'd lived. When I zipped the bag closed, the sound felt louder than it should have. Final. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment longer, pressed my hand into the mattress. It didn't remember me. That was all right. I stood and opened the door. The hallway felt longer than ever. Empty. All the other doors stayed shut, silent, loyal to whoever held their keys. I walked past them without touching a thing. She was already up, standing near the front door, phone in hand, coat draped over her arm, ready. She looked at me and smiled politely, the way you do when something inconvenient is finally resolved. "You're leaving already?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded, no surprise. "We'll make sure you've got everything." I glanced back down the hall. I do. She stepped aside to let me pass, her body angled just enough to keep control of the space. I noticed that. I always did. My son came out of the bedroom then, hair still damp, shirt wrinkled. He stepped forward and hugged me, too tight, too sudden, like he was trying to make something right through pressure alone. His arms stayed around me longer than usual. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. I held him back, felt his shoulders tense, heavy. "I know," I said. He pulled away and looked at me like he wanted to say more, like there were words stuck somewhere between his chest and his mouth. He didn't say them. She cleared her throat gently. "We'll check in later," she said. "Make sure you're settled." Settled. I nodded, thanked her, because manners are habits that don't die easily. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. The one door, the only one she never locked. My hand rested on the knob for a moment longer. It felt familiar, solid, honest, no trick to it, no hesitation. Behind me, the house stayed quiet. No one rushed, no one stopped me. I opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt different right away, cooler, wider, like it didn't need permission to move around me. The sky was gray but open, stretching farther than any room I'd been in months. I turned once more. My son stood in the hallway, hands at his sides, looking smaller than I remembered. She stood behind him, already checking her phone, already thinking about what came next.
I smiled at him, not the careful smile I'd learned there, a real one, the kind that remembers who you are. "Take care of yourself," I said. He nodded, swallowed. The door closed behind me with a soft click. Not locked, just closed. I walked down the steps slowly, didn't rush, let the sound of my shoes on concrete anchor me. Each step felt lighter than the one before, even with the bag pulling at my shoulder. At the bottom, I stopped and looked back at the house. It was a nice house, clean lines, good neighborhood, everything in its place. It would keep going just fine without me. I turned and walked away. As I reached the curb, I realized something I hadn't let myself think before. Leaving isn't always losing. Sometimes it's choosing yourself before you disappear completely. I adjusted the strap on my bag and kept walking, the morning opening up in front of me. And somewhere between the curb and the corner, I wondered, quietly, honestly, who really lost more that day. If you feel comfortable, I'd appreciate it if you left a like on this video. It helps these quiet stories reach the people who might need them most. You can subscribe to the channel if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about love, endurance, and the things we carry longer than we should. And if you want to, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read them, truly. Knowing this story traveled farther than my living room gives me more comfort than you might imagine. Thank you for sitting with me. Take care of yourself, and take care of the people you love.